So welcome. I thought it was such a beautiful day. It would be really nice to jump out of the studio and come out here, get some fresh air, and talk a little bit about the landscape here on the East Coast or Western New York. This place is about maybe 10 minutes walk from my studio, about a 1 minute drive. And for me, coming from Colorado previously, I think thinking about the mountains there in terms of this geologic timeline scale, those are much newer mountain systems, right? You have these Rocky Mountains, this 14,000 foot 14ers that are beautiful for climbing, huge rock faces. I love going climbing out there in the alpine. But if you're looking for clay and you're looking for old mountain ranges, this is a really nice place to be. We got literally clay being eroded for millions of years right in the hillside here for us. Pretty much everywhere you're standing, you're kind of on top of clay here. It's kind of the reason why the School of Ceramics is in existence is that in 1890, or around 1890, the Celadon Terracotta Company was established. And that building, actually, the original building is directly across from the School of Ceramics, which was established in 1906, so not too long after. And for me, I've been really interested in folding in this local kind of raw clay into the process, thinking about different firing temperatures, what that's doing for the work, screening or not screening, how that bloating, or different qualities that it's bringing to the work. So I think historically this clay is kind of low fired in terms of the Terracotta Company, but I've been really enjoying seeing what that range is there. I think as you go hotter, it starts to kind of expand, and you could say bloating in terms of what it's doing to the work or to the qualities in the work. I'm really excited about. You can kind of see how easily it's already starting to break down. But I usually like to take small batches. I've been really enjoying working through like these small batch sizes and so I usually just grab a small bucket like this and I'll take it back to the studio to process. So usually about this size or a little bit more. So here we are in my studio. You can hear there's a lot of background noise. And don't really have any control over it. There's a new ventilation system that was put in and lots of doors and different kind of traffic noises. So I'm going to actually do my demo at a different location. But I wanted to show you guys a little bit of pan of my space here. So before we leave my studio, I wanted to show a little bit of my material research. The process always starts with making of clay, thinking about the tonal and tactile qualities I'm thinking about wanting to work with. So today I was kind of thinking about mixing up some mauve color. I think it could be really nice. Maybe a little more subtle version of that grading there with the shale clay. This one's always like a cookie. I've been liking these magnets to kind of like expedite moving things around. We'll see how it goes. Alright, so I'm down here in the grinding room, which is the clay mixing facility, and I'm gonna make this color, which is a kind of sort of mauve color from porcelain slurry, and then I'll start with that, and I'll weigh out the stains, and I'll mix those into that slurry. And I'm gonna use this beautiful Char machine, which is a heck of a lot better on my back than how I've done it for the most part up to this point, which is just in like a 5-gallon bucket, blending with the drill. And so this will go be a lot less physical labor. Alright, so I have the shale clay that we collected down at the creek the other day, and it's nice and dry, and it's going to be ready to process. And I'm going to first use this jaw crusher, and then I'll use the hammer mill. And the jaw crusher was recently refurbished by Keith Simpson, who has been called the Swiss Army knife of ceramics by people we definitely look up to. And we're really lucky to have him here. We wouldn't know what to do without him, honestly. And my partner, Brooke Cashin, who also works here in the grinding room, and they refurbished this. They picked a really nice color scheme. I think they went back and forth a few different times, but I think they did a good job. So once it's in the jaw crusher, it'll take it down to kind of a coarse grog kind of mesh size. And then we'll take that out of there, put it in the hammer mill, and it'll really knock it down to a nice fine powder that'll be easy to process, or easy to work with and process with water after that. So I want to talk a little bit about these plaster slabs. I use these to dry out the clay, and you could use plaster troughs. I like the slabs. I tend to mix up with as little as water as possible to get it as plastic as I need. And that kind of expedites the drying process. So it's usually about 24 to 36 hours, depending on the climate, obviously. We're kind of transitioning from the humidity of the summer to a little bit drier out here on the East Coast as fall's coming around. So those times vary. And I have many of these, and so I can dry lots of different clays, different colors, different clays entirely. And so that's really been instrumental in kind of pushing the process forward, I think. And then I'll kind of come back in and manually thin this out a little bit carefully. I always love the clay in this period. I think trying to capture those qualities in a finished piece is a huge part of it. So. Trying to just get as much as I can, maximize the space, and then get it as thin as possible. All right, so wanted to talk a little bit about the clays that I'm going to work with here, but also just talk about these cups to kind of reiterate and come back to some of the points I was making. And so you can see here, this cup is just straight shale and fired to cone 10. You can see really dramatically how much that is going to increase that volume, and it's kind of bloating up. This cup also fired to cone 10, but the shale is mixed with the porcelain, so pretty much almost entirely porcelain with like 5% shale here down to about 80-20% down here. And you can see how different that size discrepancy is. And then you can see when you take the shale and you screen it down, fire it to a slightly lower temperature, you get these beautiful more maroon colors, which I'm really interested in. And then again here with these two cups, the shale, higher percentage shale on the bottom of this one, kind of widening that foot, growing it up, and then the same thing happening here on the top. I really like the juxtaposition of those pieces. And so what I'm going to do today is something similar to this cup. I'm going to make a bigger version of it, I guess, but we'll have the shale, which I processed very similarly to the porcelain after the grinding and down to a powder. So again, I'm going to kind of show a little bit of how the process goes, but maybe kind of micro-sized, these like portion sizes. But I'm going to try to, this will be somewhat similar to this mauve color that I mixed up in the grinding room. I pulled a little bit out and processed it a little faster so I could show you guys that today. And then the shale, which I processed very similarly to the porcelain. After grinding on the two machines there, added water and then slaked it on the plaster. So this is kind of a smaller version of how I would maybe do it by volume. So generally I start with two similar sized pieces of clay, be that this size or much larger. And so then I'll kind of mix by volume. And just for the sake of this, I'm doing this pretty loosely by eye. All right, so that's kind of seems like a pretty good start there for the mauve, and then we'll do the opposite essentially with the shale here. So I think this is pretty close to where I can start mixing these clays together. And so as I'm, starting to handle and thinking about that, mixing them together, I think these clays really couldn't be more on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? I think I'm thinking about porcelain, I'm thinking about mined associations, from industrial processes. This clay was, and the shale was just dug from the ground here by me, right? And processed by me in a different way. So I think there's a balance and there's kind of a tension in that I'm trying to explore in the work. So as I start to kind of blend those together, I think there's something happening in the process and then something happening in the work. So, and again, this is kind of like a miniature version of how I would make a batch. Although I have been enjoying working in these small batch sizes, and allows for a lot more material and color exploration quicker. So you can see the blending pretty well together. The quality's kind of already starting to change. Even with this, I don't know, maybe it would be like 75-25 or 80-20, somewhere around there. Could always weigh it out if I wanted to be really specific, but for this, I'm not doing that. So you can kind of start to visually see that it's, it's starting to gradate a little bit darker there. And so once I get these to a place where I'm thinking that the gradient looks at least visually like there's going to be enough contrast there for me. And sometimes, I can go back in and just manipulate those a little if I need to. These actually look pretty good. Maybe I could add a little more shale to this one, a little more of them off there. But anyways, I'll transition here and I'll roll out some slabs. All right, so I'm going to roll out some little slabs here, and I'm going to make a cup. So I like to start with the lightest color usually. It's maybe just a habit, but and then it'll be easier not to transfer color too much if I don't want to. So in this case, it's not as big of an issue. It's the first time using this table, so it's a little shaky there about that. Little baby drawn out slab. Sure, maybe Bandana will show us how to do their giant ones. This will be kind of funny in comparison. But I do like these rolling in and just kind of compress and start to get it a little bit more precise to the shape. Always just, compression is just so key, so I always come in with ribs and all my slabs. I never use a slab roller, right? Just like doing them by hand, no matter what size, and these baby ones are pretty easy by hand. So I'll set this aside, and then I like to put them on fully covered with, you probably can't see this, but fully covered with plastic. And then I'm not in so much of a rush. I used to just roll them out, leave them out in the open, and then there was like this movement and flow to the process because the thing was kind of slowly drying, but this is actually makes it a lot easier to work and much smarter way to go. This will be actually the last slab, because the other one, this will end up becoming the foot, so I'll actually keep the mass just like that. Love how much shorter and how the quality, the technical qualities are really changing. This is kind of generally how I would work. With larger pieces, I would roll a bunch of slabs, and especially when working on different colors, they kind of all have their own board, plastic wrapped, and then I can like stack them up, and you can work on the same piece for days if you need to. So we'll cover that for a minute while I set up over here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my process. I work with both plaster and bisque molds. I like the bisque molds. They have they release a lot better. There's certain advantages to that, but I really like the plaster a lot because it really grabs the clay, and I'm able to kind of really push the lines and do different things with it. A little harder with the bisque molds, but it's I throw most of my forms on the wheel, and then I'll cast the plaster volumes out of there. So I think it's really tied to the wheel in that way. There's even kind of these marks in time I will kind of leave as like remnants of that process and ties back there. And it's a nice, it's always a nice practice or a nice experiment to cast the volume out to see if it was close to what you were imagining in your mind. So I'm gonna, and then I do make some, or I've been starting to go this direction of making forms out of the round, and so I'll carve just a solid piece and then cast the mother mold, and then I'm able to cast the actual mold out of that, which is really nice because then if I ever break this or lose it or whatever, I have this mold, and kind of works as a trough as well. Dry some clay in there. And then there's actually a bigger one back there, which is nice, kind of like baguette form. I kind of was thinking about with this. And there's actually one of these pieces that's in the Gropius exhibition that was built off this mold. So similarly to this piece comes out of the mother mold, and I can work on it. And then after the molds are made, often I'll sit down and I'll throw a bunch of different volumes and and then cast them out, or if they're clay, or I'll bisque them, they'll be bisqued molds at that point. And then I'll kind of wrap clay around them and respond to the form itself and make templates that'll kind of be guiding points as to where I'm going to break up that form. And sometimes I don't really like the volume that's there, and so I won't really use it, but it'll still be there, and I'll come back to it later on for another form. So that kind of is this generative process, I think. So I'm going to make a cup today, or start with this cup here. Using the slabs that I just made. So I really love these Shimpo banding wheels. I think they're so nice that they have a weight. I can really kind of toss them around like a standing kick wheel or something. So I really like these Shimpo banding wheels because they just have this nice weight to them. I can really toss them around, kind of use them like a standing kick wheel or something like that. But I think for the process, it creates this effect for me. I really enjoy it. And oftentimes I'll have, I don't know my other banding wheels, but I'll have a couple banding wheels going at a time with parts that will be assembled later on. So this one will be a single piece. And then I like to make sure that this, once I get it kind of centered there, I want it to stay put and kind of eliminate that as a variable. So what I often do is I know that this will be my first layer template, so I can kind of cut that form, and I can use the scraps to kind of adhere piece to the wheel. So it's kind of like you would put lugs down for trimming or something like that. I like to use the clay, whatever clay color is going to be touching it. It just helps with the. It's not the end of the world. If it's not, I won't really stick to it in the end, but to the piece, I guess, itself. But it's nice because then it can kind of remove the possibility of it moving out of my mind and really enter the process more distinctly. So I like to work pretty wet, like with pretty wet clay. I think it allows a lot of flexibility. Like this is actually pretty good thin. It actually might be a little on the thin side, but if it's too thick, I can kind of stretch and respond to that. And that template, like I said, kind of gets me close, but I can address where I think it needs to meet or not throughout the process. And I think get away without slipping and scoring. I'm working so wet. Especially with the porcelain, I feel like it's a nice. It's not too much of an extra step. It's a nice habit to be in. So this tool is really important, and it really allows me to push those lines and manipulate how they're going to interact with the form really nicely. So I can see like that wasn't close, so I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. I'm just being really sensitive to how I want that to sweep there. I'm always considering that as I'm making. Compression is just a huge part of this process. I'm just naturally doing it, which is really nice. You can see how the plaster is really grabbing the clay, so it'll really push those lines. But the bisque mold, depending on what temperature, I guess it's bisque too. It's starting to pull away a little bit more at different times. So I'll start on this second layer here. And keep all the little scraps and pieces I cut off, and those can always be used. Another reason why working on these banding moves like this is so great is it's really easy to slip and score, right? So I'll use my second template that I've made. So I think, as you can start to see this kind of visual change in the layers of the pot, I think it's a nice way to kind of segue into, what kind of keeps the work fresh, keeps the process fresh for me, I think, is something I'm always after, I think, and I think this is a nice visual representation of it. I think working with all these different clays, and I work with a ton of different clays, red stonewares and terracottas, these local clays that I'm integrating, porcelain, all different kind of colors, and the material research that I'm doing keeps it really fresh. It keeps me on my toes. Like every time I'm working with a different clay, it has different characteristics, right? And so that always is keeping things fresh. Making of new molds, ways to process form, think about making new forms is always moving the work forward. And I'm actually doing this little clay project with a friend of mine down in Santa Fe who's doing a bunch of research on a local clay that he has down there. And so I don't know if you've ever received wet clay in the mail. I guess, clay companies ship, so I guess you probably have. But he's processed this local clay for me and sent me a bunch in the mail, and I'm gonna make some work for him out of that and send it back to him bisque, and he's gonna fire it in his wood kiln down in Santa Fe. So, and he's sent that out to I don't know how many individual people, but it's quite a few, and I think with the idea of hopefully having a exhibition with the work, and I don't know if I mentioned his name, but his name is Ralph Scala, and I know him from working at Anderson Ranch. He was there forever. I'm sure a lot of you probably are familiar with him. Really great guy. So I'm really always trying to see how this is meeting that volume down there and pushing the lines. I love how, while there's a little more clay underneath, how when you apply that pressure, it's just changing that motion of the line, and the clay is wanting to go that direction. I'm pushing it and allowing it to do it, but it's also doing what it kind of wants to do in its own way. So there's always a kind of balance between those two things. And this is the part where these transitions, I'm close with this template, but I know that maybe just remove like a little bit here and just help with the form in the end. So much of that stuff becomes muscle memory. I guess I work over here more. I should work over here more. I'm going to where the light's coming in out here, but this is better for the camera. I like to remove the kind of excess clay here on the transitions between the layers and that kind of clean line. I like the transition on the inside being a little bit more smooth like that, and I like that tension kind of between the outside and the inside in that way. And also it kind of brings it back again to the wheel in a different capacity. So yeah, all those little bits I save up, and these will, this can become a part of another pot, or maybe it's a foot on something, or I'm really enjoying that part of the process that's been developing, particularly here we're having lots of different clays around, and how you can put some colors together that maybe are working a little bit harder, to quote John Gill there. And so I work with these little cookie cutter kind of things. I like them, they're color coordinated, so it's really nice. It's a really easy, fast way to get a circle, obviously, but the color is really nice because I know that for this form, it's pretty much a template for me, because I know a green size will be pretty close to what I need here. So again, kind of expediting things in the process. I think this time in grad school has been this real kind of slowing down, actually, in a lot of ways, and maybe noticing all of those things that maybe we took for granted in that way, that we kind of sped through, and questioning them, I guess. And but it's nice to take more time, I think. You're maybe sacrificing a little bit in terms of the flow and momentum in some capacities in the process. There's more stops and starts. Maybe somewhat like this video. No. So really compressing that line. So those lines on the inside will be clean as much as they can and be a nice surface to drink out of. So I'm really trying to think about this gradual kind of transition here, a little bit larger of a space into a little bit smaller, and then a little bit smaller, and so there's a visual space on the pot that I'm really considering very, very specifically as I'm building. So I'm gonna put the foot on this. So this is like really where I think the slipping and scoring comes in. Made some big pots when I was first starting with this process, and I don't think I slipped and scored very well, and I had the bottoms basically blow off. That's when I was like, maybe I should slip and score more. I think the beginning of this process was really like, how many rules can I break? And I think you can get away with it, but I opted to just do it most of the time. So yeah, you can see like how nice and just kind of, there's just such a nice quality in this clay here when they're mixed together. And you kind of see that as I make the foot here, I think. So I'm really just kind of compressing and shaping, getting close. I want to, in general, have more mass because it's a little bit easier to take it away than it would be to put it back on this point. So. So this is doing like lots of different things, but mostly it's just compressing and really adhering that, but it's kind of making that flat area where it's going to meet the table. And so then I'm starting to see a shape here as well. So I'm going to kind of now come in and start to really shape this with my hands. Kind of following that flat area that was created by the paddling. So I can already see this is going to be a lot. Not a lot, but it's too much clay. So I know I'll be able to take some of that away. I don't want this to just overtake that. So I might start with just taking off a little bit of the mass right here to start with. Yeah, you see how toothy that clay is. I didn't screen any of the grog or anything out of this shale, so it's got lots of good stuff in there. And so then this is a nice part of the process where I can, it's really great. I can kind of just jump straight into the trimming of the foot, right? So I always loved, when I would throw, primarily, I was always throwing in anticipation of when I could trim. I love trimming, so it's nice to kind of jump into that so quickly on a pot and not have to wait for it to dry. And again, these banding wheels really make it nice as I can trim just like I was on the wheel. So I'm thinking about the thickness I want. I'm going to do a little bit of throwing here on this too, so I want to leave room to move the material for that. So I think this is getting pretty close. So then I kind of different forms. There's more of this kind of part of the process, but I like to kind of think of it as throwing because I'm kind of for the first time using water again. I think another thing that how this work kind of developed was I was getting really avidly back into climbing, and throwing on the wheel was taking all my really hard-earned climbing calluses away. And so like trying to integrate a process that used less and less water was like definitely a component of it. But this is when I kind of bring water in a little bit again. I'm just kind of getting it wet so I can, again, shape this form, compress it, and then really kind of start to shape it. So kind of after shaping with my hands, fingers all kind of come in and really compress it and kind of finalize this, the outside of this foot form with the ribs. It's pretty good there. And then I like to do the last kind of part I do to the outside here is kind of trying to tie this foot together with the rest of the form. And so I'll kind of use this tool to do that. I really liked those little moments last time when the pot was touched on this, part of it at least, or on this exterior part of the foot. And I think that kind of nicely ties into the rest of the lines that are happening here. So I'm gonna come back and readdress this. Maybe soften this line up a little bit. But now I can kind of take the mass here out of the interior of the foot. Great thing about working with the molds is that I can kind of check the, it's not as audible as you would with a pot without volume under there, but I can kind of check and feel it, so I know that I can take a little bit more off. Then I really like to compress, especially with this shell. I'm going to compress this a little bit more here. And then kind of maybe ties it back into these like marks that seem almost thrown, which they kind of are, I guess, in that capacity. You can kind of see this process really kind of starts really grounded in this volume in the wheel and kind of this tight form, and then it kind of loosens up and comes back together and tightens up at different points in it. And I think that's something that I'm really sensitive to and in search of in work too. So one last check of that. Just do a little. And so I'm gonna cut this off of here. We gotta try to get that pesky mold out of there. You can see the kind of lugs that are down there. And so what I do is I just like to pull, and it's okay if some of these do little crack-ins. Sometimes with demos they do that because it takes me longer to get through, and but I can usually address that. So I'm kind of making this little kind of skirt under here. Just going to give me a little bit of space so I can try to pop this thing off of here. comes off real nice. You know, if I were to work a couple more cups off this exact mold, the saturation would start to become an issue with the mold. And I typically like to make a piece off of a mold, and it's kind of a nice rhythm in the studio in that I can make a lot of different forms, a lot of different pieces of forms, and then either combine those or it kind of moves me through the process in that way. Like I probably wouldn't make another cup directly off of this. I would move on to a different form or piece of a form. So, and now I can kind of address the actual what volume will be. You know, I think that mold gets me close, but I think it's not going to be quite what I'm looking for yet. So sometimes I'll need to compress this interior where I couldn't really apply the same pressure to the rest of the pot, kind of address that. I've had that, especially with the porcelain, you know, it could open up in the firing. Usually just a little bit of that. Yeah, so I'm going to start to really shape this and think about what I want it to, you know, kind of where I want these lines to end up at the volume and give it some breath. Kind of work my way slowly up to the top. I don't really rush this part. This is one of those moments where it really kind of slows down. Thinking about how I'm going to address this rim. You know, I have this excess clay here on this part where the two slabs are meeting, and thinking about, I kind of liken it to a kind of like thinking about throwing out a pitcher spout or something, but I'm just kind of slowly coaxing the clay up, and I'm going to kind of gently let it come back down where it wants to go. I think this does a nice way of tying, again, this kind of rim with the rest of the form here. Kind of, again, just sort of adjust this form here. A lot of these like micro kind of little movements at this point. And then I want to come up top and really address this inside of this rim here. I'm going to bevel it. I mean, I'm really thinking about how I want, you know, someone's interaction to be with the piece. When they're drinking, you know, their lips, I'm really considering that. I like the undulations and variations in the lip, but I also want this to be a little more functional and not just reading straight kind of slab top. So I'll kind of coax it a little bit here. And this also really compresses the rim. This is, you know, if I have cracking issues, this is usually where they'll be. Doesn't get nearly as much compression from the rest of the form. So I'll kind of come down and just make sure that's not too far out. I'll just kind of soften this just a little bit again, just a little bit of water. I do a lot of sanding too, so I'll sand this when it's bisqueware, and then when it comes out of the kiln as well. Sometimes I do, depending, like, you know, with this, with the grog that's going to kind of come through, or the material that's going to come through with the shell, sometimes it's nice not to have it sand, sometimes it is, so it varies for each piece, but I can address some of these, if these become sharp points sometimes, and I can kind of take that off gently. But the great thing about my process, you know, is that at this point, this piece is finished. I think if I wanted to put a handle on it, I could let it set up a little bit. But essentially, when it comes off the mold and I've addressed all the subtleties of the form that I'm looking for, the piece is kind of set aside, and so I don't have to wait, for the process to dry, that I can kind of do those last steps. So I thought it would be kind of nice to bring this piece over, just in comparison with this. I think the color will be slightly different. It'll be kind of more towards the purples, hopefully, that mauve color, and it's in reverse, the shales on the bottom. You can see here on this form, it's really expanding the volume up here. It's really nice to kind of bring over. And I believe this piece is actually in the lecture portion as well. So, all right, so I'm gonna make a larger kind of jar form. It'll be kind of similar to the ones that are in the Gropius exhibition. There's two. There's like a large black cover jar and a yellow with a nice blue glaze. So this will be similar in form to those. And so you can see it's very similar to the cup, but the process is just really blown up. And so again, like using these templates, I'm gonna find the place where I want to use those. So I pre-cut the pieces. I like to do this especially with the big jars, pre-cut them, just to make sure I know I have enough slabs rolled out, and kind of expedites the process a little bit more. We'll start changing of the light when we have the evenings coming upon us here. So usually attaching these first ones is a little tricky, but we'll see. I haven't made one of these in a little while, so it's kind of nice to do it. So this mold again was through a big bowl, and then I cast this volume out, and it's actually hollowed out inside, so it's still kind of heavy, but it's not crazy heavy. You can kind of see with the scale increases, it becomes a little bit more physical too. I kind of enjoy that part of it. So I think I get asked a lot, like, if I have advice for, future ceramicists, and I think some advice I can give is the way that I kind of made it work as a full-time studio potter, and I think that's the best way I could kind of at least speak to that. And for me, it was all about trying to figure out how to make it work. Financially, I think it's always that question, right? Like, how do you do that? And for me, I always, I had a climbing background, and so I spent a lot of time in a vehicle for climbing trips, and traveled around the world, and so it seemed almost like not too hard of a transition for me, but I kind of talked about it in the lecture a little bit, but I kind of cut as much of the overheads as I could. I moved out of our house that we had. My partner moved out to school, and I stayed put at Fort Collins, and it was cutting that overhead, and then putting the money that I could have or could make into this really nice giant studio space that kind of serendipitously was vacated around the time when all this kind of decision making was happening, and so it ended up being kind of I guess you could call it the van life. I don't know, but I would live in a, sleep in a van and go to the, gyms in the morning and shower and use the bathrooms. And it was really nice because they had free coffee in the gym, so I'd go. It was like the first thing I do, like wake up, drive the van, go get free, pretty bad coffee, but it was free, take a shower and clean up. It was like me and a bunch of, blue hair, old people. I didn't really exactly fit in, but it allowed for kind of intensity and focus in the studio in that way, by kind of making these like creature comfort sacrifices. And I think it was a way, maybe not a long-term forever fix, but a definite way to. So I don't know if that's advice, but I think like getting creative, I think with how to make it work for you. Is maybe a big takeaway from that. Maybe living in a climate that's more moderate. Living in Colorado in the winter in the van is not that much fun. So some nights, you're just waiting for the morning, go get your free coffee and warm up. And up until, kind of going back to school and first time around in undergrad, I kind of spent, my whole kind of teenage into adult life working a lot of hospitality or like food and beverage kind of jobs. And growing up in Santa Cruz area, there's a lot of tourism, and so it's very seasonal, so I'd work just like super hard, make a bunch of money, and up until that point, I'd use the savings from that time to go, traveling and climbing, and I really going back to school. And when I found clay and like deciding to go back to school was really when I was like trying to transition out of having to do that kind of work, this like seasonal work that I wasn't really attached to. It was very physical, manual labor. I try to figure out maybe how I could do and turn the thing that I was really passionate about into a career. So this would be, well, it's essentially making a bowl, I guess. And this will end up being the bottom of the jar. So I like to make the bottom first and let it set up. So then when I make what will become the top or second part of the two-piece kind of bowl, this will be ready to accept it. So this is kind of similar, I guess. I think actually that piece was made off this mold possibly. So kind of making something similar to that, and then I'll make it again, and then we'll put them together, and so I'll show you guys that when we get there. Alright, so we're kind of coming back in at this point when I'm going to put this big mass of clay up here, and I can kind of shape it into the foot. Just really trying to compress it, start to shape it, get a little flatness to it. A bit too hard. That's a kind of a good start, I think, there. So I'm going to kind of start to shape this here. I'm going to take off a decent amount of material with this needle tool. So I feel like it's getting pretty close. Try to be pretty cautious with the amount of water down here, but I do want to kind of shape this a little bit more. I'm looking for the width of the foot I'm trying to kind of get close to this kind of proportions here. I think, I don't know, maybe it's a little over a third of the circumference of the piece and kind of elevate the form in the volume there. So it's been a little while since I made this one, so I feel like I might be pushing a little bit with this one, but we'll see what ends up happening. So I'll do one last little movement here. And then I'll trim out the foot. So I'm kind of trim this. There's a good amount of material in there, so this is kind of fun. But I kind of take it pretty slow. Sometimes I'll mark what I want, but I think for this, maybe I will. Why not? So I really like to kind of compress this area. Soften this, pretty sharp right there, but and then I usually do a kind of rib the inside here a bit. So anyways, this really kind of adds both kind of the marks I'm looking for and compressing as well. And I think this is a kind of nice kind of transition to talking a little bit about mentors. I think is a good topic and question that was proposed, and I think kind of taps back into a little bit of advice for young ceramicists. I think finding a good mentor is something I would give as advice for sure. I think I was really fortunate to have a few really good ones. Sam Clarkson back in Santa Cruz It's my first pottery, like real pottery teacher. You know, I've had another clay teacher before that, and Catherine McBride. And then, you know, through Sam Clarkson, I met Allegheny Meadows, and I think through him just found an amazing mentorship. You know, a lot of similarities in, I think, our personalities. Part of that might be we're Aries, and we're fiery, and we work hard when we get together, and my partner Brooke as well. So we like made this trifecta of that. But I think that's advice I could give, and I think I wouldn't be where I'm at today without those people, and like in particular Allegheny. I owe them so much. I think that's something that's beautiful about this ceramics community, and something that really drew it to me in the beginning. So I think this pot, or this portion of the pot, is pretty much done, and I maybe could throw a stamp on it or something. So after the bottom of the jar was pulled off, I kind of got the top of the jar started here, and we're just finishing up this first layer. We'll kind of come back and we'll add the second layer now. And I think when I think about jars, I think about a lot of historical pots. You know, I think you know, moon jars, and thinking about volume, and but I also think about another one of my amazing clay teachers in Sanam was here with us for this event, and I remember giving a really amazing jar demo back when I was in school, and I think she made a jar about, she's pretty pregnant, and she made a jar probably about the size of her belly, the jar was pretty big, so I was pretty impressed, on a kick wheel as well. So I hope she makes one of those for us here. I think about, you know, living with pots and what it means to be a potter today, and I think there's a beautiful quality in handmade pots that you know, really can sneak up on the, you know, the owner of those things, or the, you know, the relationships with those pots. And I think I really think about what it means to have the privilege of someone having their work, my work, or any work in their lives, and what that relationship can become. I think you know, it just grows. Rick just held up the card. It's also hard to talk and make. It is hard to talk and make, especially I haven't been practiced at it for a while here. This is a big transition, I think, for me. You know, I think it's yeah, I mean, I'm maybe in a very different place than I think everybody else, obviously, that are in this, and I'm not as well versed in this part of the process, and it's been a pleasure to kind of get back into it in a way. But yeah, it is hard to make and talk. But I think about culture, and you know, having a pot that kind of can go into that culture in some capacity, and the larger that becomes, or larger that circle of people becomes, you know, I think the more lives that you can, you know, have those relationships, or that they can have those relationships with the work. You know, I love that about pots. I think, you know, I think probably a lot of us could say we had similar experiences, you know, getting kicked out of universities and jobs and everything, and then getting back into this domestic kind of setting. I mean, it was really great, being in a graduate school program. Not great, but it was really interesting being in a graduate school program where you get kicked out, and then everything kind of changed. All of a sudden, I'm at home and I'm with my pots and my collection, and forging these very different and intimate relationships that just weren't even, maybe were there, but just grew even that much more. And I think through that time, and I'm gonna add this last kind of layer here. Yeah, these big banding mills are so great for these big heavy banding mills are so great for the big pots, especially. Really move this material around with ease. Makes my job a little easier on this end. So let's see. Sometimes I'll just take a scrap kind of piece and I just put it on that I know is going to be big enough to spread the gap, and then I can kind of just cut it to shape on. Use the banding wheel to make my circle. So this is, obviously up to this point very similar to how the bottom was made. So, and then basically after this layer is when there'll be kind of a nice, or that's when the departure kind of comes to make the top. There. So this is kind of where this changes. I'm actually gonna cut a space out here, which will become the inside of the pot, obviously. So, and then I'm gonna do something very similar as a foot on the bottom, but instead I'll cut out the gallery or internal part of the lid, and I'll show that here in a second. So I'm gonna get this big mass of color on here. Kind of pre-formed wedged and kind of pre-formed this back together here. So similarly to the foot, I'm gonna compress this down. But I still have that opening down there. I'm gonna cut back through this to that opening. So I'll show you this out. But I think back to that point too about not being able to talk and make very easily right now. I think, in large part, I think I can say that that's, I'm not as much in the production mode. I'm not making as much, so it's not the little decisions are weighted a little bit more in my mind because I'm not as practiced in the muscle memory. So kind of going from that like production-based pottery practice I was in before coming back to school, and this kind of more research-based inquiries and kind of a deepening of a relationship, hopefully by allowing this kind of range in the work and just kind of being in relation and more permissive with our relationship, I think. So I think it makes the talking and making a little harder because I definitely go through a whole day of being in the studio and maybe never saying a word and making not the same thing more than once. So it's been interesting, like kind of balancing those different relationships, I think. So it's kind of getting close there. I'm kind of trying to think about the relationship here between the pieces. I think the kind of domestic space at the forefront of the work again. Transitioning from being in the studio here at school back to home and now being here and just kind of like getting back into what that is and this kind of facility. So it's nice making a big piece, I think. So like a lot more physical than the kind of like physicality of the process. I think comes through a little bit more at this scale. It's nice. It kind of brings up like kind of whether or not you kind of integrate these things from your personal life kind of into your practice, if those are kind of intertwined or not. And for me, I feel like this work has always felt very connected. I think kind of came, into existence through like really getting into climbing again. Out here, there's not a lot of rock, not a lot of mountains. Anyways, like I kind of said before, and like so I've had to pick up new ways to kind of balance out the studio life, and recently picked up disc golfing, which is really fun. In another life I was a baseball player, I think, but I dabbled in it when I was younger, and so it's kind of fun to throw things, and with the disc you throw it, try to aim it at something and just watch it fly. There's something so beautiful about that, so I've been kind of doing that a little bit here while the weather was nice, particularly this summer. Not really any disc golf courses super close, but there's one like 45 minutes away. All you really need is a field, though. Just go and throw it. Cut out, make a mark here. I'm gonna try to follow that and see if I can remove that piece as much intact as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I just want to get it close. So this will become the interior of the lid, and I'll make the actual lid separately, but on a different mold. So let's see how this goes. So this piece essentially was cut out of here, and it's going to get me real close to a nice fit going back in. So I'll make that form now on a separate mold. So that piece that was cut out, I'm going to use one of the little cutters, and this will kind of change the shape of it a little bit, but it'll still keep me pretty close to going back in there, because I'll do a lot of adjustments to get it to fit just right through the making, and then sand and get them together, bisque, and then when they come out of the final kiln, I'll silicon carbide and hopefully get that fit really nice. And so this is just kind of you kind of think of it as like coring, like a core sample out. And then now I have the beginning of what will be that interior part there. So give this a flip. So now I can kind of shape this a little bit in preparation for attaching the other side. So we'll kind of let this set up a little bit more now in this angle. This is pretty close, but I want this to stiffen up a little more to accept the other piece. All right, so I'm gonna try to take this piece and put it up here. They'll walk the ladder, so see if they're gonna make it. Doesn't look so pretty right now, but hopefully we'll get it there. Just kind of trying to stretch it gently to get it to go over this edge, and then can kind of take a step back and look at it and see what I need to do to adjust the line or the angles and where they're meeting. Tucking it under there. This part usually takes a little while just to kind of try to get these two pieces lined up. I'm looking at these here and down here. And once I have them close, I'll actually add some water down here and get them compressing together, and that's when I can start shaping it. But it looks a little funky right now, but hopefully we can get it there. So I'm just going to start kind of shaping it here from inside, compressing with my hands here on the outside. I'm really kind of squishing that clay in there as much as I can. And then thinking about the form out here. Mask is kind of getting in my face. Sign of our times. Guess. So this again is like kind of a slower part of the process. I know that I'm going to take many passes around. It's not going to be done in one. It's not a single pull kind of situation here with this. Gonna kind of coax it into the volume that I'm looking for. I'm always trying to pay attention to the foot down here, see if I'm pushing it too much, too fast. If it's going to fail, it's going to fail down there. There's like a timing with this, especially this scale, where it's soft enough to really maneuver it and hard enough to make it work. And it's not too soft that it's going to fail. I get a little bit of a wrist workout doing this stuff for sure. Used to have such sore wrists from working in restaurants my whole life, from carrying trays. I couldn't do push-ups like normally for years. Luckily I haven't worked in a restaurant in a while, so my wrists have been getting a little better. Looks like I might be close all the way around here, so I might take a step back and see where we're at here. Looks like I got a little lean. So it's starting to lean on me, but I kind of got it back, let it set up a little bit more so I can kind of shape it a little bit more here. This part's pretty slow, so it's kind of doing some tweaks, and then I can see some of how it's changing the form and where it needs, but I like to step back and kind of see where I need to come in and then come directly to that point. So it's a lot of back and forth. This is not my music, by the way, that's playing. We have a hot shop class program in the Recording Museum of Glass. It's not that far from here, and a really awesome class program here, but they do play their music pretty loud, so I apologize if that's coming through. I picked this space because it's a lot quieter than our studio spaces, and also can close the door. Courtesy and quality's sake, I think this is a better option, but they are playing some jams over there.
this can go on for some time. Really trying to get the form that I'm looking for. It's a labor of love at this point here. I think knowing when to kind of stop or know where it's at. I think sometimes a pot tells you by like just failing or sometimes it just speaks right out. I don't know. Knowing that moment, but I think a little bit more adjustments to do here. Try to get this where I want it. Like these larger forms because there's, I'm working with a lot thicker slabs, so it's really nice. This part of the process is actually really nice. There's so much more material there that I can really stretch out and kind of elasticize these lines a bit. Really amplify the kind of undulations and really shaping it from the inside here. Trying to give it the most breath that I can. Trying to get this line, these layers to kind of meet better in this line here. It's kind of a subtle process, I think, with all the tension being down there on that foot that's still kind of maturing in terms of its strength. But I need this to be pretty wet to be able to do this, so it's kind of, again, that balance between the timing of everything, so. Alright, so this is getting pretty close to being able to let it rest for a bit here. I'm just gonna kind of clean up the inside a little bit. I'm just gonna get ready, and then I'm gonna make the lid over on this area here. Almost fall into the pot. That would be very funny. So I've kept it pretty well intact up here, but just needs to be a little cleaned up to prepare for the lid. There'll be like micro adjustments up here after the lid's made and kind of adjusting the relationship between those two things. For it's not going to be perfect. Alright, so I feel like that's at a really nice point. Where we can let it kind of set up a little bit more while making the lid. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and throw or make the lid here. It's kind of like throwing slabs, I like to think of it. So I'm just gonna center. This is like a kind of hybrid mold. I use it for lots of different things, plates or often lids, lid forms or shallow. I'm just gonna go ahead and attach this loosely at least, so I don't have to worry about it flying off here. So I have the piece that I cut out earlier, which is nice and set up. So that'll be the inside part of the lid that will fit in here to the gallery. But for the outside, I want to kind of think about how much space I want to go over. So I like to take this dimension at least, so I know where the width's going to be. And I'll kind of go a little bit outside of that once I put the slab down. But I like to have that as just a reference while I'm making. I want this to, hang off kind of architecturally in some fashion here, kind of coming off, but not too far. So that'll help me get pretty close to that. I also have obviously the visual here. I always like to have the jar kind of put together so I can reference it while I'm making it. I'm gonna just make this a little slightly bit bigger. It's not a circle yet, but it will be. Let me get that compressed so I can see what this is. So now I kind of want to take this out pretty close to the edge of this. So maybe just enough. Maybe a little bit on the small side. Maybe. I think it'll be just fine. We'll see how it goes. We'll wing it. This is the demo. So I have to kind of cut it about halfway through and then just get it nice. And this kind of ties back into even like kind of the lip here on this piece. In these kind of moments in the pod. So once I have that set, start to kind of shape this and think about the layers here. I'm transitioning from the heavier wheels. I gotta give this one a little more go. So as I'm making this, I thought I could maybe chat a little bit about, I don't know if there's a most important kind of lesson I've learned thus far. My clay life and my whole life, I don't know. But I think definitely that's something that's been on my mind, is thinking about, the idea that your studio is really wherever you are. I think we've been going through so much transition, and I think in the last year I've had almost 5 different studio spaces, and I think creating kind of a balance in your life with clay and things that are outside of clay that can make it so that you're still having a positive relationship with that are what I've really learned, and is a huge part that I struggle with. I get intensely involved in everything that I do, so it's so easy. I'm not a very good multitasker. As you can see, as I start talking, I stop making completely. I mentioned earlier I started disc golfing a little bit. I don't know if that'll be in this part, but that's been one way that I've been kind of incorporating, because the outside's so important to me. It feeds the work in so many ways, and it's been climbing and hiking in the wilderness, and there's not as much climbing here, so finding new ways, and disc golf has been a really new addition, and it's a really fun way to be outside here. And my partner Brooke is pretty darn good at it too, which is really fun. And she likes it a lot more than climbing, so I make her carry a bunch of heavy things and walk really far to go climbing. And discs are pretty light and they fly really far. So I'm trying to, create this connection here with the pot. And yeah, I think historically I would put maybe a handle on here. So I don't know, I'm gonna maybe think about that. So I'm just gonna make a handle for the finial here. So I like to roll out a coil, and then I get to kind of think about the size here. So just kind of starting to shape it. And I'll kind of come in with some water. Here. Trying to find a good spot for the water. Kind of shape it with the water. Going in kind of circles back and forth, like a Karate Kid or something. Wax on. But just starting to kind of fan it out, move that material. And then, so once that's kind of close to where I want it, I can kind of actually come in here with the fettling tool and kind of get it closer. I save these little bits. Well, actually, yeah. Anyways, I save them. So you can kind of see it's already starting to get pretty close, and kind of soften these lines a little bit. So I can kind of come in here and start to give it a couple of pulls. Shape it. Yeah, kind of maybe take off those rough edges a little bit. Alright, so the little pieces that I cut off, I like to save and kind of roll this little coil out. I'm just trying to kind of tie it again better with the layers of the piece. So. So now that I have the handle made here, I'm going to put it onto this piece before I pop it off the mold. So I'm really starting to kind of shaping it, like pushing these lines, kind of again, kind of mirroring the line quality here and the rest of the pot with the way that I'm pushing out the clay here. So the qualities are kind of mirrored throughout the piece. Also, I'm thinking about when I start getting into shaping this interior space, kind of trying to hopefully mirror kind of this volume in the piece. So yeah, really being on the plaster is allowing me to still kind of push these lines. So then I can kind of come in here and start shaping this. Yeah, I think with this scale of jar, these kind of larger handles are really nice and get, your full. I think most accommodating to most fingers size in there. Nice big handles, nice. I think my handles, I'm always looking for a nice gesture in them, and kind of like complementing the form of the pot itself. So that's probably getting pretty close there. I'm going to have to take this off and put on the bottom, so once I get it on the pot, I can kind of do the final adjustments on it. So then I can kind of pop this off of this mold, and then I like to sometimes put them back onto the mold that the jar is made off of, and I can kind of start to shape this just a little bit. It's also a way that it can just rest while I prepare the bottom to be attached. So this is a piece that I cut out from the interior here. So usually I can kind of just eyeball this, because I'm just trying to get close. I'm gonna be able to kind of slide it if it needs to be adjusted a little bit, but again, I'm just kind of meeting this part here. So I'm just slipping and scoring here, the top and then the bottom here. There's a lot of adjustments through the making here between the two in that relationship, and then also through each stage of the process too. I'll be, as a bisqueware, I'll kind of stand and start to hone in as well. And then also when it comes out of the kiln, I'll use silicon carbide and get that relationship as close as it can be. I'll have to use this fettling tool to kind of just re-straighten this edge. Inevitably, it's been pushed around a little bit. So, and then I'll also clean up this point of contact here. So I got the lid down here, and I can kind of do some kind of tweaks here before I see how it's fitting. When I'm thinking about this piece and how I might glaze it, I have this beautiful green fuming glaze right now, which there's a mug and a cup and saucer in the slide presentation that I have. That's really nice. I think it's really simple glaze, chrome and FSI, and something like that would really bring this clay body maybe to life. So let's see. So you can tell that I could probably push out the inside part just a little bit, but it's good to start to see where the form's at. It's close. It's close. It fits well. It's got a little gap space, so I think it can. Which is better. I'd rather have it be that way probably than the other. I'll have to take away a bunch of material and kind of stretch it a little bit more. So yeah, I guess technically it would be done for demo purposes anyways, but the Potter tweaks are still to come maybe. So yeah. Thank you again to the Huntington Museum of Art and everybody there for having me a part of this amazing event. I'm excited to see the other artists' presentations and demos, and I hope I've made a worthwhile contribution to that conversation, and I hope everyone can be safe and be well.